So the key thing I'll be looking out for your Rakdos Arcanist fans is, does the Rakdos Arcanist player here in Luis Salvatto, does he have Dreadhorde Arcanist? Because if he does, life is good, and if he doesn't, it's going to be pretty hard to win.
It's an excellent value card. Lets you recast spells from your graveyard when it attacks. And this deck runs two ways to give it haste. I think you talked about them before. You've got the Fame side of Claim to Fame, and you also end up with Claim the Firstborn. Claim and Claim to Fame. Definitely a little confusing when you're looking at a deck list because there's a lot of claiming going on. But both of those haste enablers.
We are mono claims here in this deck. Just so much claiming. Unfortunately for Isaac, he's claimed an opening hand of 5 cards. It's like a double mulligan. And Thoughtseize in this deck is not, I will call it less than ideal, because one thing that this Rakdos Arcanist deck does very well is that it uses its graveyard as an extension of its hand. You mentioned Claim Fame. Works great with the graveyard. So
Look,
same
there's
thing
a Fame right there.
Exactly. So this is a deck that actually doesn't mind discarding cards or having cards in the graveyard because it does get access to them over the course of the game once again. And Stitcher Supplier is a great representation of that. Does not mind putting cards in its graveyard at all.
No, and also this deck has a companion. One of the few decks we've seen that does not run a kind of freebie companion. This deck really uses its companion. It is Lurrus. Lurrus able to recast permanents once per turn from the graveyard of CMC 2 or less. Very helpful when it comes to recycling your Dreadhorde Arcanist or your Young Pyromancer. Of course, Stitcher Supplier getting great value there. Put that Claim to Fame in the graveyard. We're seeing Dragon Skull Summit into Cruxa, going to force the opponent to discard when they've already had to mulligan, and very few cards left in hand.
Now, one thing I do want to note is that even though Isaac has claimed 2 mulligans here in this match, the important thing to note is this is why Goblins is so good. This is a turn 3 Goblin War Chief, not the most powerful thing in the world, but look at the hand of Krenko and, Muxus.
Oh, it's all about that Krenko.
Yeah, so this game, it's going to be about Krenko, but with the idea of, you know what? I can also still continue to play towards this end game of Muxus, which if a Thoughtseize is not drawn or fired off at some point, will almost certainly win the game because that's what Muxus does. So even though a mulligan to 5, this is what makes Goblin so powerful. It goes, I can still play on a mulligan to 5 pretty easily, and we're seeing that happen right now.
Got to see Village Rites being used on the Stitcher there to fill up the graveyard and also give Young Pyromancer a 1/1 elemental token. And now it's time for another Thoughtseize. Need to hinder that Muxus before it can land on the battlefield, and a Bedevil on Krenko, because Krenko would be goblining up the board. Really, just doubling the number of goblins every single turn. It is an exponential growth, and it is terrifying if you are facing it down.
Yeah, those were 2 incredible draw steps off that Village. As I mentioned, Thoughtseize is very important for that for that card to show up over the next 1 to 2 turn window before Muxus showed up and probably took the game away from Luis. So he was able to find one of those. And then Bedevil, this deck doesn't play a ton of spot removal, but it does play at least 1 copy of Bedevil. That took care of the Krenko problem. And now, if you are Isaac, your thought process is, all right, I need to figure out a way to either find another Krenko or find another Muxus. Goblin War Chief isn't that bad of a draw. Wily Goblin isn't either, because it does mean that if 2 War Chiefs and a Wily Goblin making a treasure are on the battlefield, that means your Muxus is going to cost 4, and you're going to have enough to do that probably in 2 turns from now. So it's not over.
With this deck, it is rarely over. Both of these players have extreme comeback potential, and Rakdos Arcanist, I'm saying, is looking like a great position to be in right now. Got good spells in the graveyard if you can manage to get a Arcanist to draw. Plenty of mana left over if you want to put Lurrus in hand. And those 2 War Chiefs, while yes, they're making any Goblin top decks cheaper, they're not doing that much on the battlefield right now. They are just 2/2s.
Yeah, right now, if I'm Isaac, I'm just thinking, okay, I got to buy time, and I need to find a Matron, or I need to find a Muxus. Krenko wouldn't be bad either, of course, because there are 4 Goblins on the battlefield, 2 War Chiefs, and 2 tokens, so Krenko wouldn't be so bad. But the problem that I think Luis is going to have, at least on this turn, and we'll see how the following turns do go, is how am I going to close this game out quickly before my opponent top decks on me? What can I do to get this game over with as fast as possible? Kruxa isn't bad at getting the game over with pretty quickly, but, you know, there are some tokens to chump block, so there's a little bit of time here for Isaac. So as much as I love this big 6/6 being escaped from the graveyard, Isaac's got some time to peel out of this. We'll see if he's able to do it.
See Luis being very careful about these exiles, making sure to keep single copies of spells in the graveyard for possible recasting later. Crux is going to force that wily goblin into the grave, and as a reminder, you do not lose 3 life with Cruxa if you drop a non-land. So here's Krenko making more tokens. Wow, that's a lot of goblins on the board.
Yeah, that's an enormous draw. This is Isaac peeling out of it. This is what I mentioned. Muxus was an ideal draw, but Krenko was probably... Well, Muxus you couldn't play last turn, so Krenko is arguably the better draw on that particular turn, where Muxus will be good if you're able to find land 4 into Muxus, because it's only going to cost 4 right now because of double War Chief. But this is what I was talking about with regards to closing out the game. This is the fear I have for Salvatto, which is... if the right card came off the top, and I think Krenko was probably the best one, now all of a sudden, as much as Young Pyromancer can do with regards to token generation, Krenko is going to do a lot better than that. And all of a sudden, you know, how many goblins are we going to have next turn? Was that? And heck, we got 7, 8, 9, 10. There's going to be 10 more goblins. And then Krut can actually convert from saying, you know what, stall, 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 to attack, 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 because my goblins even have haste. So this is really, really bad news for Luis Salvatto. Probably the best draw on the deck that turn there for Isaac Krut.
So we see Luris coming down. I think Luris had to be played there for the lifelink of all things.
Yeah, I mean, over time, you're going to be able to accumulate an advantage, but, you know, Crux is going to attack. It doesn't have trample, thankfully, and so what's going to happen is, you know what? I'll chump block. Yeah, I'll take 3, but I'm at 13, so I go to 10, 10 to 7, 7 to 4, and by that point, how many goblins do we have, do you think? Are we gonna crash Arena? Who knows?
Oh, it's just a casual 18 goblins, 17 of which can attack this turn, up against an 18 life total. There's a Thoughtseize, which can hit an empty hand. Of course, that's not going to do very much. And I think we're going to see Stitcher's Supplier being recast from the graveyard using Luris.
Yeah, again, the biggest problem here is what's the best case scenario? What's the best case draw? I talked about how this deck doesn't play a ton of spot removal. That's why that Bedevil that was drawn earlier in the game that killed the first Krenko was such a big deal. It was Thoughtseize, take your Muxes, Bedevil, kill your Krenko. You don't really have very much going on. But Krut said, actually, I do. You can't stop the top of my deck. I found a Krenko, and I've got way too many goblins. I'm going way too wide for you to keep up in this game. And at 18, we can call it a theoretical 21 because of the lifelink there from Luris. We could see Krenko pump out 15, 16, 17, 18 goblins, send all of them sideways, and even at 21, I don't know if that's going to be high enough.
Oh, I do not think it will be. I think that right now Luis is digging. Yup, we're seeing a Fame being used on Luris. That is, I believe, for the lifelink. Just trying to get as much life as possible. 5 life instead of 3.
Yep.
And, oh, we're seeing Young Peasy going in. No?
Hey, I feel a little frisky on that Young Pyromancer, I think.
Come on, Young Pyromancer. You wanna hit some face here. You're not that useful as a blocker.
What's also a little bit unique here is we're going to see this attack with all these creatures. And so now, if you're Isaac, you have the opportunity to kind of decide how you want this to go. Because you can say, I'll chump block Cruxa, or I'll chump block Luris, or I can say I'll gang block on all of this stuff if I want to. And this is what feels really good right now if you're Isaac, even on this mulligan to 5, which is you have all the options. Now, are you going to play around a removal spell like the Devil killing your Krenko? Almost certainly not, because if Krenko dies, you probably just lose the game anyway. So if I'm Isaac Krut in this spot, I'm not even going to play around the Bedevil. Yes, Luis Salvatto has Bedevil mana open. Whatever. I'm going to try to block appropriately so I can win the game the next turn while also decimating my opponent's battlefield this turn on their attack.
There's no damage coming through here. As a full block. And there is, I think, only trades for these 1/1 goblins and Luris.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the double block on Luris, which doesn't surprise me too much. Let's get that off the battlefield, chump the Cruxa, make a bunch of other blocks. Your battlefield, well, see you later. And I've still got an active Krenko. I'm at a pretty healthy 7. You're up to 23. I predicted 21 pre-Fame, so gain a little bit more life. But again, you're seeing the power of an active Krenko, not only in this deck, but in this matchup. It's running away with this game, and Salvatto does not have a lot of spot removal, so this is just way too difficult to overcome.
There are still 13 goblins on the other side of the battlefield, which means 26 of them next turn.
Mm-hmm.
26 against 3 whole blockers, but only 25 of them can attack. Is that going to be one off lethal? Swing all with the goblins?
It actually does look like it. Land was a less than ideal draw step, so you just got 13, 23, 24, 25. Block 2 War Chiefs, block a token, that's 22 damage coming through, so you don't have to attack with all of them. You can attack with, I'll conservatively say, a lot of them. And here's the big question. Is there a way to get 3 Kroxa activations this turn from Salvatto?
I think there is.
If the answer is yes, he's going to win.
Graveyard.
Yeah.
There's 6 mana, 1 in hand, 1 in the graveyard. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a drain for 9 just through Kroxa attack and enter the battlefield animations or activations.
I think you might be right about that. We might see this Kroxa on the battlefield attack. That'll bring you down to 4. And then if you're able to get it back from the graveyard twice, and we're already seeing Salvatto move in very, very quickly. So I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I actually think he's going to steal this game because he's found enough Kroxas from the graveyard in combination with Fame to steal this game.
No, Luis Salvatto running 4 Kroxas in the deck, probably controversial to a lot of deck builders out there, but it's really paying off here. Each of these hitting for 3 directly to the face because unless you have a non-land to discard, you are paying the toll, and that is Kroxa sealing out a win.
And you know what this is? And this is going to be an absurd thing to think about. So Salvatto's going to win that first game, right? Think about the double block on the Lurrus, which made sense at the time. Get Lurrus off the battlefield, and one could argue that Lurrus attack looks strange because you're just throwing the Lurrus away. But if there had been a single block on that Lurrus, we came up a point short, didn't we?
Yep. And
the previous
those
turn
are getting doubled. They're getting doubled every single turn. You got to think in exponential numbers.
So was that as I know Newmont the Nummy likes to say, was that a punt? Exclamation point? I don't know. I think it's a really tough decision at that point in time, predicting that, I'm going to be a point short the following turn, because also keep in mind, any goblin that's drawn or Castle Embereth or anything like that wins the game for Isaac as well. Might be kicking himself a little bit there, though, thinking on a mulligan to 5, I drew the perfect card and it slipped away. Yes, Salvatto found all those copies of Kroxa, but both these players played what I think was a really, really compelling and good game, but maybe just a slight slip up from our Goblins player there, and Luis Salvatto able to steal that first game.
We're seeing a couple things get changed in the sideboard. The obvious one is the Red Cap melee coming in against any mono-red deck. That's going to be a great piece of removal. And Young Pyromancer coming out as well, going down to half of the total of 4. And I think that's smart, trying to not compete with going wide against Goblins, because Goblins does it best.
Yeah, in some situations, I think it's okay. There will be some games where it lines up appropriately. There will be others where it's less than ideal. And that last game that we watched, where Krenko was, going a little wild there, not at its best. But I can see you don't want to get away from it fully, but you can get away from it at least a little bit, which is Salvatto is going to do here.
Oh, but Cedric, look at this hand. Look at what Luis has drawn. We've got 2 Black Sources and 2 Witch's Vengeance. With a 3rd land, this is going to be horrible for Goblins if they can't close out a win quickly. I do see a Scourge Prospector in Isaac's hand, and that makes me think there's going to be an early Muxus coming down.
Well, there's certainly the potential for an early Muxus this game. Now, do remember, Goblins is an incredibly resilient deck, so sweepers, while good, it's important to sweep and then close very, very quickly. So I'm not saying these Witch's Vengeance are going to be bad. Quite the contrary. But I will say that Goblins can kind of work around that card a little bit. My fear this game right now for Salvatto is that, yeah, he's got those sweepers and Witch's Vengeance, but is he going to be able to close the game quickly enough? And it's the same thing I talked about last game, where he was getting kind of brickwalled by Krenko making Goblins and Goblin tokens in general. Now, again, maybe Isaac was supposed to win that last game, maybe a little bit of a misstep with the block on Lurrus, all that other stuff, so on and so forth. That was last game. We got to focus on this game. But the bigger point here is that the ability for Salvatto to close out this game, I'm a little bit worried about that. Insofar as this game might end up going long, and you can see with the hand of Goblin Ringleader and Muxus, and Goblin Matron, which can get another Ringleader, sweep away. Because on a battlefield that right now that looks like this, if I'm Luis Salvatto, I have to kill these two creatures. And if I'm a Goblins player, I'm like, sure, whatever. If you didn't, I could Muxus next turn, but my hand's still awesome, so that Witch's Vengeance, it's okay.
Isaac may have been stopped from that turn 4 Muxus, but a Ringleader, refilling the hand, got 2 cards off that. Was that Skirk Prospector and a second Goblin Chieftain. And now the first red mana source. Or maybe not. There we
go.
Who needs red mana?
Yeah.
All those wonderful claims in hand. Claim to Firstborn, interestingly, can't hit the Goblin Ringleader. That's a 4-drop.
So this turn is a little bit interesting right now if you're Isaac. How do you want to navigate? So you got options. You can play Matron, search for something, play Skirk Prospector. You can Chieftain Prospector. You don't have to double spell this turn if you don't want to. You've already seen one Witch's Vengeance. We're at a tournament that have open deck lists, so you know your opponent here in Luis Salvatto has access to 3 Witch's Vengeance, and you know they're all coming in. So we're going to take a little bit more of an aggressive slant here. Stitcher Supply are going to get in the way. Let's get some damage through. Force my opponent to have another copy of Witch's Vengeance, because if they don't, it's Mux's time.
Young Pyromancer is about to demonstrate one of his greatest skills, which is not being a goblin. Witch's Vengeance is a tribal hate card. Gonna give -3/-3 to the goblins on the other side of the battlefield, and there's still a Muxus in hand, so a couple more lands, and that's going to happen. There's actually 2 Muxus in hand at this point.
So, gonna rewind to the early stages of this game and what I talked about a little bit for players who might be newer to Historic or just kind of wondering how the matchup is going. So, both Witch's Vengeance, they've been cast. They've cleared some goblins away. But you can see in Isaac Krut's hand, still a very, very powerful and capable hand. We're going to see Matron. I would not be surprised to see it go get Skirk Prospector, play the Prospector, threaten Muxus the following turn. And even if this stuff gets taken care of, you've got a Krenko in the holster, and you can draw multiple lands to get to Muxus. So, again, the biggest thing I'm worried about here for Salvatto is, can he close the game out quickly? Now, he did find a 3rd copy of Witch's Vengeance, which might not be so bad, but you gotta get this game over with and kill your opponent quickly, because if you don't, the Goblin Grandee. Yeah, that's not bad.
Claiming it and getting that sweet Dreadhorde Arcanist recast. And claim again, this time on the Prospector, because it's able to sacrifice itself.
Yeah, you got to get the Prospector off the battlefield, because you know what Isaac has signaled pretty loudly, that, hey, I'm trying to set up Muxus, because also if you're Salvatto in this situation, your thought process is, okay, so what's in your hand because you're not playing lands? And pretty obvious, like if you're not playing lands, you almost certainly have 1 Muxus, maybe 2. So I want to do everything I can to prevent you from doing that. Now you're 1 land away. Now here's a Krenko. We saw how effective that was last game. Probably got to try to get that off the battlefield now. This 3rd Witch's Vengeance, I think, is actually going to be pretty important in this game, too. Being able to clear up those goblins, be able to continue to push through damage, and basically kill the opponent, ideally, not on this turn, but the following turn, hopefully, to try to get this game over with. Salvatto, kind of interesting here, because I think he's probably thinking, is there any way that I can clear these goblins off the battlefield and win the game this turn before my opponent peels land number 6 for Muxus number 1? I don't know if he can kill on this turn, but it might be the following turn. But still, I think a totally fine turn to be casting Witch's Vengeance.
Yeah, and with the Dreadhorde Arcanist on the battlefield, I believe Fame would let it recast Witch's Vengeance from the graveyard. Not going to happen this turn. Instead, we're seeing the 7/5, which was a 5/5 reanimated with Lurrus. Or was it Claim? I believe it was the Lurrus recast.
Luris recast Heart Fiend from the graveyard, which made it a demon. Then you fame the demon to make it a 7-power creature. I think this. Yeah, so this is gonna bring him down to 1. So he's got to peel land.
And
brutal blood crypt.
Who cannot pay the 2 to shock in the land? No Muxes is coming down in this turn. That is a win.
Brutal.
Oh, look at that.
Brutal blood
That's
crypt.
a wonderful victory right there. Definitely something to be happy about. When you beat the top deck that's in a tournament, you know you've done something right. So congratulations to Luis.